Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who have experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week we are talking about nonprofits and foundations. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Sandi Vidal. Sandi uses she, her pronouns and serves as the Vice President of Community Strategies and Initiatives for the Central Florida Foundation. Sandi is the immediate past president of the League of Women Voters of Orange County. She has volunteered since she was 16 and has served on several boards, currently serving on Mayor Dyer's Multicultural Advisory Board, and is a fellow for GEEO at the University of Central Florida, focused on sustainability. A graduate of the University of Miami School of Business, Sandi has a degree in business administration, and she is a die-hard Cane in a house full of Noles. She has over 14 years of nonprofit leadership and over 20 years of business management experience. So Sandi, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I also have returning Louis Damiani. Louis uses he, him pronouns and is the executive director of the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. His professional career in business and public service spans more than 30 years, having served the Central Florida community as a county commissioner, corporate executive, small business owner, governmental manager, television host, and homeowners association president. He has a master's degree in public administration from the University of Central Florida, and he did his undergraduate studies at The Ohio State University. So Louis, thank you so much for being back. We're so excited.
Always a pleasure.
As a very brief introduction, as many listeners already know, the VSC is a nonprofit organization, but what exactly does that mean? So today we are joined by Sandi from the Central Florida Foundation, and together we will be discussing the relationship between foundations and nonprofits, the challenges they are facing, addressing stigmas about this industry, and the importance of community partnerships. So with that, Sandi, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the Central Florida Foundation and what you do there.
Sure. Thanks, Emilie. Well, the Central Florida Foundation is a community foundation, and our focus is building community by building philanthropy. We work with fund holders not only to build their legacy for tomorrow, but also to invest in social change for today. We've got a variety of different initiatives that we're working on at any given time. Right now, we have Housed, which is the Central Florida Housing Trust. We have Rally, which is a social enterprise accelerator. We have 100 Women Strong, which is a women's giving circle that's focused on women and children's issues, and a variety of other things. My role at the foundation is to lead grants, scholarships, and community initiatives, including Thrive, which focuses on creating a collaborative framework to focus on the root causes and simple solutions to complex social issues.
Thank you so much, Sandi. That's a great overview. So with that, what exactly is a foundation? Like, how would you describe a foundation for those who aren't familiar?
Sure. A foundation is a philanthropic giving organization. It can be a corporate foundation. For example, Bank of America and Wells Fargo have corporate foundations. The Magic has the Orlando Youth Magic Foundation. It can be a family foundation like the Edith Bush Charitable Foundation, or like us, a community foundation where we're really focused on the community at large, and we're made up of a variety of different fund holders who have invested through our foundation. And the foundations either focus on certain issues most of the time or general geography.
Oh, I didn't know the geography piece to it. That makes a lot of sense. Really cool. Thank you so much, Sandy. And, Louis, on the other side here, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to work in a nonprofit, and what exactly is a nonprofit?
Sure, yeah. So a nonprofit at its core is a business, but we don't seek to make profit. So, we serve to exist to try to improve the quality of life and provide, social services and or goods. In our case, it's all services. And what it's like to work in a nonprofit. Well, it's like working in for-profit, only a lot harder. It's such a lean and mean environment in nonprofit because you're not well resourced as much as you'd like to be. I'd say historically the problem that I see in nonprofits is that you're under resourced. So for me, when I worked in for-profit work, I had a very specific job and lots of resources to do my job. Here, and I think what I love about it, by the way, is that I get to wear 32 hats every day. It is the most challenging work that you can dream of. It's terribly rewarding at the end of the day. But everybody that I have met in this line of work are kind of share that mentality that you have to wear multiple hats. You have to have amazing broad set of skills, and you just have to work extraordinarily hard and be creative and be smart. And so it's awesome. It's a real, and I stumbled into it as kind of the last chapter of what I wanted to do in my life after having worked in government and having worked in the for-private sector. Only I wish I would have found it 30 years before, but it allows you to sort of combine all the skills that you need, because again, at the end of the day, it is a business. We just have to be a balanced zero profit situation at the end of the year. And trust me, it's not hard to be a zero profit situation when it gets to the end of the year.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me to my other question, Louis, which is, how did you find this work? Because I know that you've been in a lot of different industries. And how does it actually compare to those other industries?
Well, I touched on it a little bit. How I found it, it really found me, I think. I was of the good fortune, a little history on the Victim Service Center. After I did my graduate studies, I went to work for a lady that was a former county commissioner. And her name was Mary Johnson, and I was her assistant. And she came in one day and had this idea that we needed in the Central Florida community to have a nonprofit, to have an entity. Actually, she at the time thought should be government's responsibility to provide services for victims. And, sort of challenged me to help her create such an entity. And we did that. It took a while. We enlisted help from UCF to help us do a needs assessment, and we pulled all of our community partners together, law enforcement and FDLE and state attorney's office, and anybody that wanted to talk about what a framework would look like. And and created this idea of the Victim Service Center of Orange County, which would be a government entity. And then she asked the Board of County Commissioners to fund it. And they said, okay, but literally at the vote for the creation, because it was going to require some resources, some money set aside from the county, one of the other commissioners said, I'll vote for it with the caveat, but I'm going to amend it to say that you've got 2 years to figure out how to become a nonprofit. And I didn't even know what a nonprofit was. So, the vote went through. We were happy because we got it up and running as an entity of government, but then spent the next two years figuring out, what is a nonprofit? How do you create a board of directors? What are bylaws? All the things that are the necessary components of, like if anybody was ever going to build a nonprofit, these are all huge considerations. So then it became a whole other kind of type of work to get the nonprofit corporation recognized by the IRS and by the state of Florida and operationalized with board of directors and all those things. Fascinating, super fascinating. I mean, I was never a dull moment for me in learning new things. And then I went into the private sector after that and worked for a bunch of years as a marketing director for a big company. And, and the reward in business is making revenue for the company. But it's not that nonprofit. So really the Victim Service Center kind of found me later on and said, look, would you have an interest in coming in and working in this nonprofit universe? Because we know you helped to get it started. And I didn't know anything about nonprofit except for like those foundational blocks, right? And so it was just really awesome to be able to come back, because the reward of not chasing revenue, but chasing mission and serving people, I really, it is tremendously powerful for people that are inspired and motivated by that. And, for me, it has just been a blessing, but that's kind of how I came full circle with it. I admire people that figure it out way earlier in life, and that's what they choose to invest their whole career in. Me, I just took a different path and got there eventually, but it's super rewarding and super necessary for our community.
I always love hearing that story, Louie. It's always a pleasure. So thanks for sharing it. And I think there is this kind of myth where a nonprofit isn't as fast paced as like the private sector. And I love that you share that. Like, it's very true that you are kind of wearing all these multiple hats, and you're there's not enough hours in the day to get things done. So I appreciate you kind of breaking down that myth. And you mentioned mission statement. So could you go into a little bit about what is a mission statement?
Sure. I mean, the mission statement is really, like, if you do it well, it's your super concise, formal statement of what you do and why you exist. I mean, it's barest elements. And sometimes you hear these ones, like that are 4 words and it's just, and it's like, wow, that's so great. Ours is a little more wordy, here, but it speaks to who we are as an organization. We provide individualized services and resources to victims of violent crime, sexual assault, and traumatic circumstances. And we do that through advocacy therapy, crisis intervention, victim support, and prevention education. So a little bit longer, but that's what it is. It's who we are, why we exist. And the beauty of the mission statement is, you give it to all first of all, the employees and the board all helped craft it. So there's this buy-in to this is what we're going to do. And then you just focused on that. It makes life so much easier. So when I have a meeting and everybody's got a million great ideas about which way we want to go, we look at the mission first and we go, does this meet the mission? If the answer is no, then we don't do that. because we have such limited resources to do what we do. But if it does, then bam, full speed ahead, because that's what you got to focus on. And that's the best part of my job, is telling people, don't worry, I'll worry about the money. I'll get with people like Sandi to help me figure out where we go find the money. But you guys focus on this statement and keep forging ahead to, help serve people and citizens. And as long as you're within the confines of what we say we're about, you pretty much got, and you know this, right? You work here, like you came up with this whole idea of doing podcasts. If you would have left that for me to figure out, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. So it's terribly powerful and really key to who we are, or to who every organization is.
Absolutely. And, while you were talking, Louis, I was thinking, do mission statements ever change, or do they typically kind of stay the same?
Most definitely. I mean, you don't change the mission to, they have what's called mission creep, right? So you don't want to just keep doing things sort of outside your mission, so that then you have to change the mission. But there are times, especially in these challenging times, where you just have to take a look at it. We have a very specific and detailed strategic plan, and we always are looking on at least a 3-year horizon. So our board will come together every 3 years. I mean, we follow the plan and we update it annually, but we'll take a real hard look at our strategic plan. But we always start with our mission and say, is the mission still relevant for who we are, who we want to be, and who we want to be in 3 years from now, or 5 years from now, at the end of this plan? And if the answer is yes, then the statement stays the same. And then we build out all the things that we aspire to want to do in the strategies to get there, into the planning process. But yeah, they will change. They will necessarily change and evolve over time as businesses evolve, as people's needs evolve, as new technologies emerge, as pandemics conquer, the whole world. I mean, yeah, of course you have to be nimble and adapt, but that's the beauty of the nonprofit with a board of directors, and mission statements that are sort of fundamental and core to that. Is it's always in front of you. You're always talking about it. You're always evolving and moving forward.
Absolutely. And Sandi, I wanted to ask you, do foundations have mission statements? And I know that you work with a lot of different organizations too, just like the VSC. And I was wondering if you could kind of comment on some of the mission statements that you've seen, like the diversity of them and things like that.
Sure. We have a very simple forward mission statement, which is building community by building philanthropy. And really our focus is, if we can get philanthropists to work together on initiatives, then that's going to make for a stronger community. And, just like other foundations, we all have kind of our own interests. And, when a philanthropist is interested in making an investment in the community, it could be in a variety of different areas. And so it could be anything from the environment to animals to the elderly to religious causes. There's all sorts of different things. And the mission statements, I think, are going to be reflective of that. You'll see different mission statements depending on, what that particular nonprofit is doing. So it may be, no child hungry is a mission statement. We're going to leave no child in our community hungry. And that would be something that maybe a food pantry would have, where we're working with a couple of organizations right now that are putting together a group called Enterprising Black Orlando, and their mission is much more focused on bringing leaders of color together to be able to invest in business and help their businesses grow within the Orlando area. And if your mission is related to animals like the Pet Alliance, it may be, making sure that there's no stray animals on the street. I don't know what their exact mission statement is, obviously, but it may be spay and neuter, and make sure that you're not producing more unwanted animals. Like, I think right now it's kitten season, and so the mission for right now is to give away all the kittens and keep them from reproducing. So, and I can't take any more. I have 3 cats. I'm
I
restricted.
I totally get that. I love hearing all these different mission statements, though, and how they can be very specific and very detailed, just like VSCs, or more general, but still focusing on like an issue or a cause. That makes a lot of sense. And I know that we've been hinting at it, kind of this relationship between foundations and nonprofits. And anyone can answer this question, but what is that relationship? How do foundations and nonprofits like work together?
I can start. For us, I think it depends on the foundation. Some foundations are kind of hidden away behind their brick walls and really don't have close relationships with the nonprofits. But I think more and more foundations are starting to work closer with nonprofits. Us in particular, we view our grantees as partners. We don't go into a grant agreement and say, this is what we want you to do. We really negotiate and say, what is it that you think that you're going to be able to accomplish with these dollars? Let's agree on the outcomes together. And so I think that it's important for us to, as foundations, to really understand the depth of the nonprofit and what it is that they're trying to accomplish. I had a great mentor one time who told me, not everybody believes in what you're doing. They might think it's a good thing, but they're not all going to support what you do. Not every foundation is going to give you a grant because it may not align with their interests, or even if it does, they may have a specific amount of money that they can give out each year. But what they can sometimes do is give advice. They can work. Louis had referenced strategic planning earlier. We do a lot of strategy with nonprofits and work together with them to help them to determine goals. We have a portal called Nonprofit Search that nonprofits can be listed on. I know the Victim Service Center is on there, where it's a transparency tool, but it also helps the nonprofits to be seen by foundations. Many of the foundations in the community actually use that tool. The City of Orlando, United Arts, and some others actually require a profile. And so that's part of the partnership with the foundation. And then I think, really tapping into us sometimes for our expertise. And, I ran a nonprofit for 8 years prior to coming on to the foundation. So I know what it's like to be an executive director. I know what it's like to wear all of those hats. And I encourage people to show up with all of their hats at every meeting that they go to, because you never know which hat is going to have the right information. But I think it's, really important, especially right now with equity as a focus in many people's purview, to be available. And so we do an Ask Us Anything every couple months or so, where nonprofits can participate in a webinar and just ask us whatever they want to know about grants, about scholarships, about solving world peace, whatever it is. And we try our best to answer that. Most of the time it's, how do we get money? And we try to let them know, here's what our process is and here's what others' process is. And we also do make introductions, not only to our own fund holders, but to others that we think would be interested in the work that's being done as we learn about it. So it's always good for us to know what's going on in the community.
Thank you so much, Sandi. And Louis, I don't know if there's anything that you want to hop in on that as far as.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental difference, is, so in the case of foundations, as Sandi said, they're sort of a clearinghouse, right? To help other foundations dispense of resources, that want to spread their wealth and their contributions into needed areas in the community. And some, as Sandi said, foundations have very specific things that they want to target and use that philanthropy to address. Well, we're in the nonprofit world the recipients of those dollars, right? So we have to have foundations as well as individual donors, as well as governments. In our case, we are disproportionately highly funded by government agencies, federal, state, local. Like 98% of the resources that we receive are grants and contracts by other government agencies. Now, they kind of have to do that, because if they didn't do that, well, then the work that we do would either go undone, or, as kind of I was alluding to when we started it, they would end up building a government program to address that. So, you kind of think of it like privatization of a government service is kind of the way in my head it fits. And governments oftentimes will do that, because then they don't have to add, more staff members. They don't have to add another bureaucracy. In fact, that was the reason how that caveat ended up with Victim Service Center. They were like, look, we don't think we do great at social services. Let's just farm this out, privatize it, create contract to help, a nonprofit. And that's great. Like, my view of how that world should work is that's the model, I think, that the way it should be, because then the constraints of government and bureaucracy and all the things people hate about government kind of go away, because then you just you have this autonomy and this freedom to do, but you need resource. And so, hence the connection to the philanthropic world, to needing to figure out what foundations are interested in and aligned with what our mission is, so that we can use their resource to achieve their mission. So it achieves their mission, achieves my mission. We do good for the community. Everybody's happy. That's kind of in how I see the interrelationship of the two working in tandem.
I appreciate both of you sharing. I think that makes a lot of sense, the way that you're describing it. And it truly does seem like a win-win-win situation when you put it that way, Louie. And we've also been talking about those resources, and we've been talking about, money and grants. So what exactly is a grant? And anyone can answer this question.
Well, I mean, we're all grant funded, basically. So the grant is the formal instrument, the contract, if you will, with whoever it is, with the donor, the provider. I mean, sometimes we get what we love, and it's called unrestricted donations, and people will just go, hey, here's some money, enjoy that. That is a minuscule piece of the money that we get. And it's always great to have, because then there's no strings attached. There's no, we can use it for whatever we deem is appropriate. But oftentimes resources will come. So let's take a foundation, maybe, is a good example, where they have a very specific purpose of how they want to see their money utilized. And so we will have then a very structured, they'll put out a grant to say, here is what we want. This is what our intention is to do with these dollars. And hey, you organizations, can you do this? And if so, we'll give you a grant. So we'll apply, and they'll say, oh, that seems like they're super aligned with what we want done. And then we'll apply for said grant. And then there's reporting requirements. Basically, it's a contract to provide the service. And then we track and monitor on our end the service that we provide, and then be able to report that back to whoever the funder is, whether it's a government agency. And all the contracts I have, the difficulty of that, of course, is that I have to have a human being. I mean, we have 20 contracts here. So we have one full-time grant manager who only writes for these to secure them, but then also does all the administration, all the reporting back to whoever the funder is to say, you asked us to do this. Here's the data that we collected to show that we did indeed do that. So, that is kind of my simplified view of what grants are. I'm sure Sandi will give a much more educated response than I did, but
I think you did a great job. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's an agreement that we're going to give you some money and you're going to do something with that money that is for charitable purposes. And it may be very specific, or like you said, it may be unrestricted. I know we're trying to be a little bit looser with our purse strings when it comes to the operational versus program and project. We can't always be, but sometimes it has to be specific depending on our donor intent. But we do now try to do a little bit more when it comes to grants like our Table Talk grant, which I think is has gone towards the podcast. That one was just hey, what do you want to do with this? What did you talk about at your table? And for those who don't know, Table Talk's an annual event. Our next one is October 14th, where we just ask people in the community to sit around a table and have some conversation around what's going on in the community, what changes they might make, and how they're going to get involved. And, the VSC said we're going to get involved by continuing to educate and spread the word out about what we and others are doing in the community. And we just thought that was great. So here we are. So again, glad to be here.
Which, by the way, for the record, the podcast, and correct me if I'm wrong, Emilie, but has been listened to in 23 countries and 26 states. So thank you for investing in us. The proof is in the pudding.
That's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I actually wanted to ask about what is it like to kind of decide, about these grants? Can you tell me a little bit about the process of awarding them? Can it be difficult to make that decision?
Yeah, we do not only our grants, but we also help with the back end of some other grants, or sometimes get asked to serve on grant committees to help choose grantees. And it can be difficult. I think a lot of it depends on, how many applications did you get? If you have $100,000 to give out, but get 100,000 applications, you're not going to give $1 to each person. So, you want to look and see what is the best way to invest these dollars. And so most of the time, the funders will have some sort of rubric that they look at to ensure that you'll be here next year, that, your financial ducks are in a row. And that doesn't mean that you have to be, Louis said, we're nonprofits, we're not profitable, but in reality, you can bring in more money than you spend out in a year. And so, we want to know that you're at least touching base on where your expenses are. Sometimes, nonprofits will be in the negative for a short period of time, and that's okay. That's sometimes just about cash flow. And so, those things don't worry us as much. But we look at, how have you structured, if it's a programmatic grant, how have you structured the grant? Do you think that you're going to be able to continue this next year? Sometimes we'll do grants for equipment because we know that that's a one-time purchase that may last a few years, although now these days things become obsolete a lot quicker than they used to. If we buy you a laptop, we're changing ours out every few years because they will only do so much, and then something new and shiny comes out. But I think it's really about, how does this grant match up to what it is that we're trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes? What is the history of the organization with us? Have they done grants with us before? in Table Talk and some of our other grants, we like to look actually for new small grassroots organizations. And so do they fit that criteria? We have, like I said, loosened up some of the strings around some things because we want to increase equity. So again, a lot of it is dependent on, what that particular funder wants. But when it comes down to it, it can be very difficult. For Table Talk, we had a committee of 5, and we had some very interesting discussion as we went to choosing those grants, because everybody's advocating for the ones that they love and think are really cool projects. But in the end, we all have to agree on that certain amount of money that's being spent. And so it can be a fun process, it can be a challenging process, and it can be a heartbreaking process because we can't help everybody and we want to. I think most of us who work in foundations are like people who work in nonprofits where they really want to make a difference. I always say, I'm just a girl trying to solve world peace in my community. And so, I want to see things work out for the good. And so, as we're working on that investment, I'm looking at, how can we partner? How can we maximize these dollars that we're putting into the community?
Yeah, I think we can all kind of relate to that at the VSC for sure, Sandi, that want to kind of change the world, like Louise likes to say.
Mhm.
On the
We're on
other,
the same page.
absolutely. Louis, on the other side of it, what's it like to apply for these grants?
It's a lot of work. It's none of the grants say, hey, listen, give me 15 words and and we'll make our determination. And of course we wouldn't do that anyway, but it's a lot of work. And so, and that time and energy that you put into really trying to explain who you are and what it is that you do and the data that supports that, again, all work. And by the way, no grantor, no funder paid you to invest that time, that work effort that has to go into that. So, you're, as a business person, you're watching your cash flow fly out the window on the off chance that you will be selected. So you want to make sure that you put your best foot forward and that you have an excellent presentation. And then I feel for people like Sandi who so they're getting some, I bet you, I don't know this because I've never been on her side, but I bet you the majority are these extraordinary proposals tackling extraordinary challenges in our community that are all needed. And then you got to decide who gets it and who doesn't. And so, it's a lot of work. It can be terribly heartbreaking. But on the other hand, when you get it, we just got one. I went today, literally drove out to West Orange County to pick up a check from the West Orange Healthcare District because they're funding a brand new pilot project that we're going to open in Winter Garden in partnership with Shepherd's Hope. We're going to actually work out of their facility, and we're going to provide services. We're going to start providing services directly to the Black community, and very intentionally working to expand the client base that we're serving, because we know we're underserving the Black community. And so we built this. We found funders that said we need to address this. We got those resources, and now we're going to go out. And I tell you, put me on in a year's time, and I'll be able to then share the data that will back up our successes. And that's kind of the game, in a nutshell. That's an example of how it all works together. But yeah, getting grants is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it is the model that makes the nonprofit world a function.
Yeah. We don't actually have an application except for in a very few cases like Table Talk. We do a very short, very brief application, but what we really use is our nonprofit search profiles. And that is work to put it together when you start. And then it's just about, it is. Actually, that was one of the things that attracted me to the foundation early on. Back in 2008, when I was an executive director, I was an early adopter on nonprofit search, which I am on a lot of things. But um, it helped me as a new executive director at that time really figure out what were the things I needed. That was the first year the 990 asked about whistleblower policies and document destruction. And I'm like super competitive. So I was like, I don't want to say no on anything. So I went to my board. I'm like, I need these policies because I don't have them and I can't say no. So so I was able to get a lot of that stuff together. And then I just, for me, it was great because I could go to the back of that nonprofit search profile and pick out any of the documents that I needed for all the other grants that I was doing. And now that it's become the back end for grants like the City of Orlando, the grantees don't have to fill that information out over again, which is great. And, that's what we hope that some of the other funders would do is, be able to take it with the 990s are there, the audits are there, all of the information about insurance and policies and procedures is there. And yes, it's time consuming, but after you do it the first time, you only have to update 6 areas a year and you can go in and update at any time. So, for us, it's where we go to search for the people that we want to be able to invest in. We look at the needs list to see what people say they need. And then we're also able to run reports to look at what are the trends in the nonprofit world and how are nonprofits doing and those types of things so that we can benchmark and really look at what are the needs out there in the community.
It was a lot of work, I'll tell you. And but it also, forced us to take a step back and look at ourselves and make sure that we were saying, that we were really telling our story. And just I'll tell you this too. We also are a GuideStar Platinum 2021. Thank you very much. Nonprofit. We are a top rated nonprofit. And I don't remember what Charity Navigator says we are, but pretty good stuff. So if people are looking, and that's the thing, that's where they're going to be looking. They're going to be looking at a portal like that. So we have to have that. It's effectively free advertising for us to really tell our story of excellence. And, if you got philanthropists listening, have them go.
Come to nonprofit search.
Service center and
yeah.
There you go.
I love it. I appreciate kind of like learning more about like this relationship and then the importance of like this collaboration here. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you, because I like to kind of talk about these on my podcast, about stigmas and kind of breaking them down. So can you think of any kind of stigmas that you'd like to address that when it comes to nonprofits or foundations?
Sure. I have 2 that just come to mind right away. The first one's the overhead myth, the 10%. I don't know where that came from. It needs to stop because we would never ask a for-profit business to keep their innovation down to 10%. I mean, Apple would never have another new product ever. I mean, it's not possible. And so, for those people who think that paying salaries, keeping the lights on, and paying rent's not sexy, it's so important. We can't do what we do in the nonprofit world without having some overhead. And so that's number one. And so it's something that we do not keep people to 10%. I mean, if your innovation budget or your program budget is not your program, but your overhead is 90% because you're renting a castle, that's different than putting all the money into your programs. So that's number one. And then the second one is for those people who think that all nonprofits should be run by volunteers, let me tell you, Louis mentioned it earlier, we outsource our biggest complex social issues to under-resourced nonprofits and expect them to solve them all. And the reality is it's just keeping up with the day-to-day business. It's the demand out there for nonprofits is high. And governments, like Louis said earlier, they outsource their problems to nonprofits to run them. And so the expectation that these nonprofits can be run by volunteers, you need consistency, you need expertise, you need people who have a background and are subject matter experts on the things that they're doing, especially within, I look at the Victim Service Center. It'd be really nice to have a bunch of volunteer advocates, but there are complexities and confidential information and things that have to do with legal practices that you couldn't do as just a volunteer. I mean, the confidentiality on that alone would be crazy. And so I think it's really important to understand that volunteers are a beautiful part of nonprofits. We should continue to have that. It's a way for people to give back. And by the way, we're number 50 in volunteerism in the United States. Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, they are all above us. So let's get out there and volunteer. Somebody out there needs you. But we can't completely run every nonprofit with just volunteers. So those are my 2 cents on stigmas of the day.
Absolutely. And Louie, and I appreciate you, Sandi, but Louie, do you have any that you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, Sandi nailed the top two. I have a third one I'll add, but just, kind of add to what she said, this idea of volunteers. Like, take us as an example. We run our business is run by master's level counselors and social workers. Have I had a couple in my tenure over 8 years that have wanted to volunteer some of their time? Yeah, a couple hours here and there. By contrast, I can share with you, last year we provided 2,611 full therapy sessions. So where are these volunteers? And then who's going to manage the army of volunteers? We do have a volunteer coordinator. We get lots of volunteer hours that come in a variety of ways that help us be ambassadors in the community. I would never sell short our volunteers because they are an amazing complementary part of the work that we do. But the notion by ill-informed people that there's just so much surplus volunteerism, to Sandi's point, that we're 50th, and that have these kind of skill sets that the community deserves, that these people, our clients, deserve. There's a bit of a in inequity, or it doesn't align, right? So that's A. B is the other thing that she said about about overhead. This idea of 10%. By the way, first of all, anybody that says that they are within 10%, well, I would say you're a bull-faced liar. So you've categorized something that completely is overhead, but you've categorized it as a direct service somehow, because there's no way that you can do that. And again, the notion that you should be running. I would be skeptical of an agency that actually did run on a 10% overhead, because how are they doing it, and what kind of corners are they cutting to be able to even do that? That number should be probably closer to 20. And we're not talking about, no nonprofit that I've ever walked into has lavish digs in all kinds of extra personnel to help them with what they're doing. It's what we said at the top of the hour, that these are all well-intentioned people that come here because they choose to, not because we're throwing so much financial benefit at them. I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges you have. We don't pay great. We are blessed because we have had a board that says we are going to give people good, healthcare benefits, and we're going to support them in that way. But if you're intending to get rich, you don't go become a school teacher, and you don't go to work as a social worker in a nonprofit agency. And we still get people that want to come here because they want to do God's work. They want to save the world. They want to help their fellow man. And God bless them all. I mean, it keeps me getting out of bed every day doing what I do to make sure they have the tools and the resources that they need to be able to do their work. So we got to get rid of that idea. The other piece, and the last piece that's kind of related to that, is this other notion that somebody donates to you, whether it's a grantor or a philanthropist, and they have a very specific, we want to give you money to do exactly this thing, but oh yeah, we're just going to give it to you one time, because then you're going to figure out how to, now you have to do this specific service with that money, but then you're going to figure out how to continue to do that service in the future without any more resource. Well, that just makes no sense on any given level. But I can tell, I hear that all the time from almost every grantor. They're like, so long term, how are you going to wean off of us? Well, we're not. You're going to give us that money, and then we're going to do this extra bit of service. And then when you quit giving us that money, then we're going to quit doing that service. Like, that's kind of it's, you got to put fuel into the system. Do you only tax people for a year and then you go, hey, you know what? No more taxes, gang. The firefighters are just going to show up day after tomorrow. Like, that's never going to happen. So, that piece of it makes me a little bit insane. And these are people that should know better. Right? These are people that actually have money and resources. So I don't have the answer, but, in the nonprofit world, again, at the end of the year, I mean, theoretically, we're running on a balanced budget. We don't spend more than we bring in. We bring in money. We spend those resources to pursue our mission and fulfill, what the grantor wants, and we get there. But there's just not like, it's not going to rejuvenate itself. And so that's a bit of a challenge.
And I think, just to your point, we need to look at how do we invest in the programs that work and, move money away from those things that are not producing the results. Or if we've solved a problem, like, we don't need to invest a whole lot of money in smallpox anymore, because who has smallpox? But, and we're not, but, if we were doing that instead of investing resources in COVID vaccines, then we would be making the wrong decision. And so it's really sad when we see great programs go away because they haven't been properly invested in. And, 3 years sometimes isn't enough either. A lot of organizations look at 3 years of funding and then the program ends up sunsetting. And so unless you can use that as leverage to really find the other resources to keep it going, it can be quite difficult to do that.
Yeah, and I'd like to lean into those challenges that you were kind of alluding to already. You talked about, low staff and outsourcing biggest societal problems to understaffed and underfunded organizations. What are some other challenges that you'd like to address as far as, what nonprofits are currently facing?
Yeah, I've got a couple. One is, COVID, speaking of COVID, has really increased the need for some services where it has decreased the ability to provide other services. So, for example, we saw lines right after COVID started when things shut down for food. There's still a higher need for food than there was before the pandemic. It's gone down a little bit, but unemployment has also gone down a little bit. Wages have not gone up enough, though. And that's one of the things that we're trying to solve for is low wages. So we're using, nonprofits and other resources in the community to make up for the fact that we're not paying a livable wage. So that's a whole nother podcast at another time. The other things I would say is, when you look at issues like homelessness and hunger, it's a big problem to solve, and it requires the community to get together and solve it. And so when you talked about collaboration and those types of things, it really means that the whole community's got to come together around those problems. It can't just be done by individual nonprofits, especially if they're working in silos. And then the other thing I would say is, back to low salaries, it's difficult sometimes to compete with the for-profit businesses or bigger nonprofits if you're a small nonprofit when you're paying low salaries. And, it's not to the fault of most of the nonprofits when they have to pay less than what the market, but we also really need to make sure that we're not keeping nonprofit employees in the same situation as the people that they're serving. And so, that's difficult when you're out there asking for money all the time. And when you have a lot of administrative burden, for example, with many of the government grants, they're not given to you up front and they say, go do good work. It's reimbursement. And so, like, having a manager for all the grants, you're managing receipts and time cards and all sorts of other things just to be able to get that money back so that you can continue to keep your operation going. So there's a lot of challenges that nonprofits have. And when you talk about being under resourced, having that cash flow to be able to get government grants is an important piece. Not everybody can do it. When I said there was an increase in some services, the arts community was really profoundly affected when people couldn't go to in-person events. And so when you think about that, it's not just being able to perform an event, but it's all of the people who work in the arts industry in front of the house, in the back of the house. Many of them became unemployed, a lot are on contracts. And so they became part of the unemployed within Central Florida. And so that means that our nonprofits are serving other nonprofit professionals who needed help during that time. And so, it's great to have the nonprofits here, but it's also, one of those industries that will ebb and flow with whatever's going on in the environment. And in this particular case, it was a very difficult time, and we're seeing some recovery there, but it's not all 100% back.
Absolutely.
There actually was one thing as Sandy was talking that it reminded me, and to put it in, plug for another. We're pretty blessed here in Central Florida. I think that we have a pretty cohesive nonprofit world, I think, and with a lot of support from the community. And the Rollins, the Edith Bush Center over at Rollins, they do a salary study every couple of years, and we use that as our benchmarking tool. And you know how many communities don't have something like that? So what it is a snapshot of all the nonprofits and what they're paying, and what salary ranges are and what benefits are being provided and stuff. So as an administrator, I have at least some sort of tool to understand, to know if I'm in the ballpark or not. And and then I have some empirical information to be able to present to my board and say, look, this is why we need to raise more money or put this much money into salaries and so forth, because we don't want to lose people. It takes me 2 years to get somebody fully trained and really up to speed, understand. That's how challenging the work is that we do. It's a lot. And to lose somebody over salary because the VA is paying more, or because some private practitioner is paying a whole lot more. I mean, I'm not talking like $20,000 disparity, but over a couple of grand, when you don't pay people a lot of money, that can be an attracting factor. So it made me think about that, because I think we do a pretty good job in Central Florida. The Central Florida community does a pretty good job in identifying, like, somebody once upon a time over at Edith Bush said, this has got to be a need that that our nonprofit community could benefit from. And I look for that thing. That's like I have to have that. Otherwise I'd just be floundering around, wondering, guessing if we were in the right universe. Anyway, a little bit of an aside, but.
And they're a gem in our community for nonprofits.
Amen.
And it kind of leads me to, another piece of this conversation, which is that importance of community collaboration. So what is that importance when it comes to solving these huge social problems? And how do you think we can encourage this collaboration within our communities?
I can start on that. I'm sure Louis will have some things to add to it. But, I think the importance of collaboration is most problems are too big to be solved alone. You can't do it in silos. You can't do it as a solo entity. It has to be done in community. And I agree, our community is a really great place where people do enjoy working together. I think the challenge in that is that there are multiple groups working on the same problem without necessarily talking to each other. Like I presented to 3 different children's groups, and they were led by different people with some overlap in who was in the groups, but not a lot of cross pollination around the information. And they're certainly not working towards the same goals. And so I think that that's something that's really important. And that's part of what Thrive Central Florida is working to do, is to really look at how do we integrate the community around a set of goals and create a strategy to be able to take us off the top of lists that we don't want to be on and on the bottom of lists that we don't want to be on. The other thing is finding partners that complement your services. I remember getting a United Way grant with a couple other partners around a jobs program that we did. We included legal help, we included credit repair and financial assistance in that, in order to make it a full package. And so we came together for one grant in order to provide all of those services. It's not always about the money. Sometimes it's just really about the resources and being able to make referrals to agencies that you trust will follow through with your clients. And then the last thing on my mind right this moment is just creating a network of peers that you can count on. I know as an executive director, I had very close friendships and still do with my fellow executive directors. I was in Seminole County, and I'm very close friends with a couple of nonprofit directors in Seminole County. And yes, I do have to keep the conflicts out of my day-to-day work, but I think that's really important to be able to have that network of peers that you can talk to and be able to learn from, as well as be able to get honest feedback on, whether or not this idea that you have is brilliant or stupid, and people who are willing to tell you that. And Edith Bush does have some peer groups for new executive directors and development directors and things like that. So I think that's an important part of collaboration in our community.
That's a great point, and I'm guilty because I don't invest enough time in my peer network. But I always tell them, like at Edith Bush, especially for the young EDs, like that is so critical, because as Sandi, as you well know, when you're in a role like this, you're wearing those 27 hats, but you don't necessarily know whether you're wearing them well. And there's a lot of days, unless your board of directors is telling you you're not, then it's too late. So it's just lonely a lot of days. You sit there looking around going, I wonder if this is the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. It can be very, very lonely in these roles. And so, yeah, having that peer network is key. I think the other piece that I see, and I think we, I'm going to brag about us because I think we do a good job of, human nature is competitive, right? So in what I saw, in what I have seen in the nonprofit world, and in every business, actually, in business, it's viewed as a good thing because competition, blah, 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 blah. So it's very cutthroat. That doesn't translate to nonprofit. In fact, it's counter to what we should be doing. And what we should be doing is pursuing mission. And if it's mission aligned with somebody else, like to Sandi's point of 3 groups that are all doing the same thing, well, shame on them if they don't know about each other and they're not finding one another and figuring out how to complement what one another does, because there just are not enough resources at the end of the day to fund 3 people doing the same thing. Now, so how do we either realign what we're doing so we do this specific piece and they do that specific piece and the other guy does the other? Well, that's all fine and well. We go out of our way as an organization, and Emilie, this, to contact our peer agencies, to sit down with them. Pre-pandemic, we would do like lunch and learns with the purported competitors because there's no competition. Nobody does what I do. I run the only rape crisis center in Central Florida, period. That's the fact. So what's the fear? And by the way, if somebody came along and wanted it, have at it, because I lose money every time I do a service, right? Like if you can do it better, we'd be foolish to not then help. Then you're smarter than me. Let me help you be successful and put resource in it. And that's where we all need to be aligned in working more together. And I don't know how we convince people to go sort of against that human nature, but really be passionate and mission driven and come together and solve problems together. And again, our community, I'd say we're pretty good at that, but like, I think we have leaps and bounds of where we can go, and how if everybody sort of had this same ideology, how we get them, how we impart that upon them. I wish I knew. I don't know if that's teaching it better in the schools. I don't know if that's leaning on the foundation folks to help kind of force that genesis to occur. But there is strength in numbers. We're better. So what? So three of us are going to help this one client. Well, guess what? If it's better for the client, if the client has a better end outcome, then absolutely that's what we should be doing, but not to the point where we're tripping over each other, where we're duplicating resource. I mean, wouldn't it be great if the three of us sat down and we were like, wow, your grant manager is only about 50% busy. Why don't we help fund your person, and then they can spend part of their time, working on some grant applications for us? It seems like it's a no-brainer. When I talk like this, by the way, trust me, I see eyes roll, and I can see the other people going, "What's this cat's angle? He can't possibly be serious." But it's true, and anybody that knows me knows that it's true, and it is achievable. And when we do it, it's super powerful, because then the walls come down, the barriers come down, the trust goes up, and then the ingenuity in this. The reason why we're collaborating with Shepherd's Hope out in Winter Garden, and I'm telling you, in a year from now, you ask me about the data, and it's going to prove that what we did worked and it was correct. And I have multiple examples of how that can happen, but it takes people to come together and then focus on the outcome and the mission. And then all the other stuff goes by the wayside. The idea that we're competitors in the same sandbox and all of that, no, we're all in this thing together, trying to solve these huge, enormous social issues. So I don't know, maybe Sandi, you got the answer. I don't have the answer. I threw out the problem, but we need more smart people doing this work and helping us get it, advancing it.
Do. Not completely, and not by myself for sure, but we've been working at the Central Florida Foundation on Thrive, which is really focused on the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN and the social determinants of health, and looking at the indicators from them as the indicators of, are we trending in the right direction or wrong direction as a community, and where can we invest so that we're going in the right direction. And so we've got 5 funds that we've set up that we're in the process of raising some dollars for, and we intend to start granting towards the end of the year, but our focus is really on integration. It's looking at communities like San Diego, Pittsburgh, some of the work that's being done in Houston, and really looking at how can we as a community come together around these problems and have common goals, because we have common pillars, which means that we have interests in the same area, but we don't necessarily all have written goals. And so, like your strategic plan for your organization, we need a strategic plan for our community when it comes to these problems. And so the foundation has been working on that for about the last 3 years to a point where we're going to have a shared community dashboard at UCF and GEO, which is Global Economic and Environmental Opportunity, run by Jim Bacchus, who used to be in the House of Representatives and has worked on the World Trade Court, and he's just a really phenomenal human being. And so there's a lot of work going on with the county, with the city, and I think that as we continue to make small baby steps, those will start to accelerate, and hopefully we'll start to see some progress. But we'll definitely keep you in the loop on that and others. It's on our website, on the Central Florida Foundation website, and then /Thrive. And we have some different areas that we're following as far as things like unemployment and food security and housing and all of that. And then, we're aligning our community investment dollars with that as well. And then Table Talk will be a piece of that as we look at the more qualitative data that's out there, looking at, does the data actually tell us what's going on? And then the second piece of it is, who's accountable? It's like number 2 problem in preventable deaths is obesity. Number 3 is diabetes. Who's responsible for that? Is it us as individuals? Is it the hospital? Is it our doctors? Is it the grocery stores, making sure that we don't buy too many sugary sodas? I mean, those are things that, as we consider the problems that nonprofits are trying to solve, it's too big for one nonprofit to solve. And so we have to come together as a community to look at that. And I agree, you're right. There are sometimes that it's okay to duplicate things because of geography, where Victim Service Center, like you said, has some very unique qualities to it. But you can't just have a food pantry in one section of town. They need to be accessible. So services like that may be duplicative, but you don't need a food pantry on every block. And we actually see that in some areas where the church has one, the nonprofit has one, somebody has one out of their garage, somebody's doing a food drop. And so quantity of food is not the problem, it's the accessibility. So we shouldn't all get it on Wednesdays, and then we don't have food till the next Wednesday or Thursday, when some of that fresh food won't stay fresh, especially if it's at end of life, which is where it tends to be a lot of times when food pantries get it, at least from my food pantry experience running one for 8 years. So.
Well, that's a perfect example, in the example that you just gave, because then it would, like you said, not distributing on the same day, or I'm sure that the built-in idea is that they're the competitor right around the corner, and if we got this donation of food, they didn't get it, so it's sort of that they lost, we won mentality, where it might make more sense for us to take the lion's share that we got and distribute them to all the pantries. So because at the end of the day, if the food gets out, none of it gets spoiled. The clients all get served. Everybody's mission got met simultaneously, right? And those are the kinds of things that I think, just with dialogue and invest in the time and energy that we can make some economies of scale, pretty quickly. Like, you really can make a difference if you can get that, that's sort of that boots on the ground level impact that I think those of us at the street level need to be working on. In fact, our board of directors, talk about strategic plan. One of our strategic goals, and and I'm probably going to mess it up because I should know this verbatim, but it's creating, I think we only have 4, and it's creating mutually beneficial, strategically aligned partnerships. And, I thought that was very profound for the board to be able to recognize, because they're not on the ground every day. And when they said it, I was like, yeah, that's spot on. That's what we need to do. And so that's one of the core things that our people have to look at every year and go, okay, are we doing this, as a part of our mission pursuit? Are we creating these mutually aligned partnerships? And so we're focused on doing that. If every nonprofit created like a goal like that, it certainly would open up a lot of additional dialogue that might not be taking place today.
I think that we had a conversation about like these challenges that nonprofits are facing, and it seems like one of the ways we can overcome them is through that collaboration piece. So I appreciate you both kind of highlighting the importance of it and how we can kind of come together here. As kind of a final question, if someone would want to learn more about nonprofits or get involved, how could they do that? Or maybe what is something small that everyone listening can do to help support their local foundations and nonprofits?
Well, I would say the small is big. It's donate, advocate, and volunteer. Watch policy, vote. Your vote makes a huge difference. And, a lot of times things that become policy are not good for the community. And so it's really important for us to keep an eye out on that, as well as donating time and talent, I think are really important. As far as nonprofits, you can find them on our portal, nonprofit-search.org. And, there's resources out there like the Edith Bush Institute at Rollins. The University of Central Florida has a nonprofit management class, and they also have some capacity building classes for nonprofits that they can participate in. And I would just say, Google is your friend. If you're looking for a particular thing that you want to get involved with, there is probably a nonprofit doing it. And if you want to start a nonprofit, I would look to see if there's already a nonprofit doing it. If nothing else, to learn from them. There are needs out there. There are gaps. There's gaps in data. There's gaps in services. And we may not have enough nonprofits in our community. We may have too many doing the same thing. But we may have a perfect amount out there. We just don't know yet. So I would just encourage everybody to get involved with nonprofits. And the number one thing nonprofits need is money. And I think we have to trust them to be responsible. They have to report it all to the IRS. They're accountable to a board of directors, and they're accountable to their donors. And so, we don't need to micromanage the day-to-day operations. Even if you're on a board, that's one of the conversations. If you're on a board of a nonprofit, overreach and underreach are two of the biggest problems that I see or I get calls on, where either the board's too involved in the day-to-day business or you can't find the board in between meetings. And so it's really important for boards, I think, to be there for the governance purposes and for the mission purposes, and to help fundraise for the organizations. And there's a lot of great board members out there. So I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that's one of the things that I get a lot of calls about. But, serving on a board is another area that I think is really important, especially if you represent a minority or a marginalized community, because we need to continue to diversify our boards and get more of the, as Louis put it, boots on the ground people who really understand what's going on at the street level to participate on boards and advisories.
Absolutely, Sandi. I love that call to action, as far as there's so many different ways to help support nonprofits and foundations, and anyone can get involved. Louis, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add or at all before we sign off.
Sandi nailed it. Time, talent, and treasure. And frankly, I think everybody should just do something. So you maybe don't have cash is king. You can do cash, figure out what you're passionate about, and go, as Sandi said, go on her website, find a nonprofit. You're going to find some great nonprofits, and then make a donation. But the talent and treasure, if you got talent, go volunteer for a board, as Sandi said. Figure out what you're passionate about, and then go invest a little bit of time or talent. Like my board, I got to have a good CPA on my board. I need somebody else looking at the stuff other than me, because guess what? We're human beings. We're fallible. We need expertise. So I've got accountants, I've got business guys, I've got attorneys. I need that resource to be able to pick up the phone and go, hey, look, I'm looking at this legal document. It kind of looks good to me, but I don't understand, this language that you guys speak. And then, you go shoot it over and let me take a look. So, it's not a heavy lift, and it's not a huge investment. And I don't know why more people don't. do it, but I strongly would encourage it. And it can be so, as I said, terribly rewarding. And we want to have everybody wants to have a great community, right? We can all agree to that. So, you get out of it what you put into it. So, getting people to volunteer, like, this, Emily, we did the pre-pandemic, we did 450 outreach events. I only got 20 people to work here. Do the math. We use a ton of volunteers that become our ambassadors in the community that will do tabling events for us. You know what? And those are people that came to us and they're like, I'm passionate about the cause. I want to do something. I'm not a therapist, but I want to make a difference. Well, great. We'll give you some training and we'll give you a shirt and we will let you go out and be ambassador in the community on our behalf. And that's just examples here. Imagine times the hundreds of nonprofits that are across our community. If everybody took that challenge to heart and went and invested something, money, time, expertise, whatever it is, we could really make some extraordinary strides and be more proud of the already great community that we have. So I'll leave it on that, but I appreciate you, inviting me to be part of this. It's always great catching up with Sandi as well. She's a rock star. She used to be, you didn't even mention, she used to be on this board. She used to be on the board of directors of the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. So
I was the voice of reason.
She's obviously very smart. So yeah, but thank you for your service to our board, and thanks for what you continue to do in our community.
You're welcome. Great organization. You're doing a fantastic job, and it's been a pleasure meeting Emilie and talking to you both. So, keep up the great work.
I think that's a wonderful place to sign off. The model of collaboration right there. And thank you so much, Sandi and Louie. And thank you to the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much, Sandi and Louie, for joining me today.